Hi, everyone. My name is Faith. I'm from the Catalyst 2030 Secretariat. Just wanted to welcome you all to the session and to mention that we are recording this session and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel towards the end of the day. Just wanted everyone to be aware of that you'll be able to watch this back if you are interested, or to share with other folks in your network if they missed the session. In the unlikely event, I hope that you are absolutely uncomfortable with this session being recorded, please do send me a private message and we'll see what we can do. And if you would like as well, I will share our privacy policy in the chat shortly so that you can visit this to see how we use data. Thank you for joining. I'll just stall for another minute or two so that we get a few more folks in the room, and then we'll kick off with an introduction to Catalyst 2030 video, after which I will hand over to Max, Michael, and Quincy to lead us through the session. So as Max suggested, if you like to write in the chat where you are joining from, that will be highly appreciated. Thank you.
And yeah, for people that are joining, as I wrote on the chat, if you could write where you're calling from and what's your name, your energy level, and if you have a minute to fill the diversity survey, that's going to help us understand who we are as a group later during the demo that we're going to do.
All right, why don't we kick off then with an introduction to Catalyst 2030 so that we can get on with the program. We're 5 minutes in already. So hold tight.
If you've seen the video already, now's the time to take the diversity survey.
Catalyst 2030 started life as a WhatsApp group among social entrepreneurs, connecting to envision real transformational change. Launched at the World Economic Forum in January 2020, it's grown into a global movement accelerating change to ensure the SDGs are reached by 2030. Fueled by passion, our 550 members working in 175 countries have collectively put in an amazing 50,000 volunteer hours, touching the lives of 2 billion people. And we're driven by values, to which we hold ourselves accountable. 2020 was a busy year, co-creating 3 reports with partners and producing one of our own. Inviting high-level guests to participate in the Catalyzing Change campaign, hosting fireside chats and expert hours, which will be continuing in 2021. To celebrate our achievements, together we placed our supporters in the limelight with the first Catalyst 2030 Awards for Systemic Change. With the blessing of the Dalai Lama, we celebrated finalists and winners in the following categories: special recognition for our early supporters, individual philanthropists, donor organizations, philanthropic intermediaries, corporate organizations, bi- and multilateral organizations, and 4 regional winners in the category of national governments. And now on to Catalyzing Change Week 2021. During this social entrepreneur-led event, we bring together diverse stakeholders in over 100 sessions to showcase their systems change efforts and the best practices that can accelerate our work in pursuit of the SDGs.
Right, I'd like to now invite Max and Michael and Quincy to lead us through the session. Welcome.
Excellent. So Michael, do you want to share your slides? All right, that is great. Okay, so thank you everyone for coming to this interactive session. Let's maybe begin with a quick agenda. We're going to be doing up 3 different breakout exercises today to get to know each other and also discuss some questions that are going to be raised, during the event. So I really look forward to, we're going to have a Google Doc where we will harvest the answers of 2 of those discussions. And I really look forward to learning from you as much as I hope that you are going to learn some things from us. Okay, we will open today with and if you haven't done the survey, we put it in the chat a couple of times, or that's the link. That would be great to have the answers, which are anonymous and absolutely confidential, just to know the diversity of the group. All right, so next slide, please. We're going to begin, next slide, with an opportunity to connect with each other through the stories of our names. Because our names hold stories which are doors to our cultures and identities. And as human beings, we all have a culture. And culture shapes our values, the way we understand the world, and the way we behave. And we engage with culture all the time, but it's usually with that part of culture that we smell or taste. It's food when you go to a restaurant, or music. But culture is much more than that, right? There are deep aspects of culture that are below the surface. And in this increasingly globalized and interconnected world, it is so important that we go deeper and engage with values to create those bridges of understanding that will allow us to thrive in intercultural societies and create those bridges of understanding that will allow us to collaborate and solve our common challenges. But the question is, how can we engage with those deeper aspects of culture? So in this first activity called What's in a Name, I'm going to share with you a really simple but powerful tool to break the ice. This is a tool that you can use in your organizations, in your workspaces, and you can use it to learn from people in a way that maybe you've never done before, but in a way that you've probably done it before, but not so deeply. And those are, this is something we do all the time, which is to introduce our names. We never usually tell the stories of our names. So let me begin just by introducing myself again, right? So my name is Maximo Seco, but I could tell you that I have 2 last names because in Spain, we've got one for our father and one for our mother. And it used to be that so Plo is the last name of my dad. But now parents have to decide which one goes first, if it's the one of the mother or the father, which shows that Spain has kind of this commitment to gender equality. But the fact is that although that has been going on for 5 years, only 0.5% of couples still put the last name of the mom first, just to share that these are things that take time. My last name Plo is from Aragon, a region in the Pyrenees, but I'm from Galicia, where Seco is from. So, all my life I've been getting this question, Plo, how is it spelled? And where is it from? Then I could also tell you about my name, Maximo, which in Latin, is the Romans used to give it to generals. So, it means the greatest. It's not really humble. But it's not really normal today, right? Well, you may know it from the movie The Gladiator. And I'm named after my father. And he's also called Maximo. My grandfather was also called Maximo. And anyway, so I just wanted to share this, to share a little bit of me, but also to prompt you to now do the same in the breakout groups. So I'm gonna write in the chat 4 prompts that I've actually used when doing this kind of introduction. So the whole idea is that you tell the story of your names, something that is, that you share a bit of your culture and of yourselves with other people. Please listen attentively, because when we go back, I'd love to hear something that you heard, maybe not so much your own story, but maybe the story of someone else in your group. So let me write in the chat the prompts. Faith, when you want, we can go to the first breakout.
That was fun, wasn't it?
That was great. I mean, I just love the stories. I have to share, and I've already been talking much, but just to prompt other people to share, I'd love to share a couple of stories from my group. Maybe wait, I don't know if everybody's back already or people are still coming. Yeah, I think we're all back. So just really briefly, well, first of all, I learned that although it's written as Francophone grain, the name of Gronia is actually called, it's pronounced Gronia because it's of Irish origin. So, which actually means, like a little bit of love in Irish, which I really enjoyed. Also, Amma, the story of Amma, you see Amma van Danzig, and you can know that her name is from Ghana. And it actually means that she was born on a Saturday, which I thought, is really cool. The parents don't have to complain, not like mine, that my mother didn't really like the Maximo thing. But, so born on a Saturday, Amma, and Van Danzig is from the Netherlands. And also I wanted to share a bit sadder story of Lisa Cooper, which, the last name Cooper tells the story of, the fact that the ancestors of her dad were slaves, and there was brought to America, and there was a time when they would, the papers and anything about the story would be lost, and people would be renamed to their profession or their plantation. And actually, Cooper means a Cooper farm is sort of a barrel maker, right? Lisa, you can correct me if I understood it incorrectly, but anyway, I just thought it was very interesting, everything that our names carry. And if please anyone else would like to share something that they learn in their groups, I would really appreciate it, and we can spend a few more minutes on this. Just Quincy, just unmute yourself. Don't ask for permission.
I thought I should put my arm up just in case I was interrupting anyone. But we had 3 really good stories. Well, one bad one, which was my own, because Hall is probably the most boring surname on the behind Smith. But I had 3 really great stories just in my little group there. We had Kenneth in Hong Kong, who had a bit to say about the anglicising of names in Hong Kong. So he's got a very anglicised name, Kenneth, but there is actual a Chinese name that isn't used but could be. And we had Habiba from Uganda, whose first name means, roughly translated, I think Habiba, I hope I get this right, is sweetheart or love. But her last name is very regional specific to the particular area of Uganda where she's from. And Habiba pointed out that if she said her last name, people from Uganda will know exactly the region of Uganda where she is. And it was, it was that localized, which is a very different story to my own Hall. I could be from anywhere around the world. And Tharaka, who's from Sri Lanka and now moved to New Zealand, who did confess that when I asked him who does he barrack for in the cricket out of Sri Lanka and New Zealand, he said whoever's doing best. And Tharaka's first name means star, which is wonderful.
Star, love, which was Gronia. That's great. Anyone else? Maybe one last person to share something, and then we can give you a small presentation about a few things. No?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of very quick things, Maximo. Without going into the specifics, it's interesting to see where a lot of the names had come from in terms of language, faith, obviously where people were born. We had people with Russian names, Greek names, a combination, Maori. What I found interesting is my name basically means a wood by a lake, but that's often how Maori names come about, by a certain place connected to something. So even though the names are very different, the way that they've been created is actually very similar. But it was just interesting to see the combination of cultural diversity coming together in a name.
Absolutely. Even across the world, you get names related to nature, to religion. That is great. All right. So, Michael, do you want to share your screen again? And I will set the scene a little bit, just as a starter, with some, how did we get, so yeah, next, there you go. How did we get to measuring diversity for social cohesion, right? And some great initiatives going on around the world. I like to talk, when I began university in 2009, and it was a very different world, aftermath of the financial crisis. And, we've just experienced a decade of protests for, socioeconomic justice, for, climate action, racial justice, women's rights. And, we almost forgot how did we get here? It's been a lot of struggle in the last 10 years that I'm really proud of. And I think this has set the scene for a lot of action in many different countries, which, we don't have time now because we want to focus on other things to talk about the world. But let me just give you a specific initiative that is going on in the European Union, which I think, kind of tells the story of, a little bit what's happening in the world. But please, if there's anything from your side of the world, from your country, any initiative which is governmental or that it's about diversity and inclusion, or, anything else, right? Like how the world is, please write it in the chat, what's going on in your side of the world. And I will tell, Michael, next slide, please. I will tell just a quick story about the Union of Equality and one of the main initiatives of the European Union from last year called the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan. So in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter movement, President von der Leyen made, this inspiring speech, which I didn't expect, in June, I think it was. And then after that, they created an action plan, which is part of this Union of Equality that has a number of different initiatives. And they're basically acknowledging that the European Union is racist, whether we want it or not. The institutions, it's just something structural. It's not about being bad, it's about unconscious bias. It's about institutional momentum, and dynamics. And just to point out, look, so next slide, please. Tell us a little bit, how the European Union is putting diversity data at the heart of the European Commission. So for the first time, the document is beautiful. I won't go into much detail, but it basically says we need to have a workforce that is representative. We need to, if you've taken the survey, you've seen that there's different questions, right? About, what is your cultural heritage or ethnicity? What is your worldview? That we need that level of fine, detailed data from our institutions, from companies, from member states, from everywhere, to know who's missing at the table, right? To know what the gaps are, so that, we're going to discuss this together later, what to do with diversity data. Just as a spoiler alert, but that's the whole idea, that we need this data. And for the first time, the European Commission has pledged to measure the diversity of the staff of the European Union, to try to find those gaps and try to build a more cohesive union. So I think that's it for my small intro. And so, Michael, if you want to kick it off with the story of Cultural Infusion, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Maximo. Some really interesting initiatives there. So, look, just very quickly, this is who Cultural Infusion is. So we're an organisation that supports a not-for-profit foundation that's run a series of programs for disadvantaged people all over the world. Our vision is to create a world that is culturally harmonious, and that's everything we do is basically working in that direction. Our founder, Peter Mousaferiadis, who we're hoping can join us a little later on, he just has a meeting with a government minister at the moment. He founded Cultural Infusion in the early, about 2001, really to help educate kids the value of intercultural education and what multicultural societies can be. Understanding that if we can help children understand these dynamics, then they can turn into more inclusive people as adults. About 6-7 years ago, Peter started to get into technology as it can scale and deliver services more easily all over the world. And that led us to creating what we call Diversity Atlas, which we're going to spend a bit of time on today. So Diversity Atlas was created initially through a process of defining cultural diversity, because it hadn't been done before, and then working to create a platform that can then start to collect and manage this data, so it's an easy process for any organisation to understand the cultural dynamics of a group of people. We did this in partnership with the Australian National Commission of UNESCO and Australian National University, and we're starting to expand this technology globally. So that's just a very brief snapshot of who we are. So we're going to focus now on just looking at some of the key trends in what is now officially diversity, equity and inclusion, and what we're seeing. So this is a statement we came up with a few months back, but we're seeing some really big shifts now in terms of growth in this space, and it's coming from people that work in companies and what their expectations are. Customers now have a bigger voice than ever. If they're aligned to a organization's values, they will tend to buy products from them, and those that don't, they won't. But the key thing is investors. We're working with organizations now who have been given short timeframes of anything from 12 to 18 months to be far more transparent in terms of their diversity. And when investors start asking and demanding those sorts of expectations, then we start to see a lot of action as well. Our founder came up with this quote at the bottom in a slogan competition run by the UN a few years ago, "Diversified we grow," and it talks a lot to the value of diversity, which I think is now starting to get a bit of a renaissance. Well behind schedule, but at least that's where we're starting to see the growth. From a business perspective, there is lots of information out there that talks to the value of an inclusive and diverse workforce. And I think these 3 points sum it up for me. So everyone's talking about creativity and innovation, looking at new ways of doing things, improving existing ways of doing things. So this research by Deloitte a few years ago showed that organizations that had these types of cultures were 6 times more likely to be innovative. Response to change has been huge, especially in the last 12 months. And they're far more likely to adapt to change as well, and obviously exceed financial targets. So there's clear business value in terms of what this actually means to an organization. We're seeing a huge growth of people in the industry. According to LinkedIn, there's been a 71% increase in the last 5 years of people in diversity type roles. People are demanding to work for companies that have work and action taking place in this space. Interestingly, from McKinsey, they saw a link between diverse ethnicity was providing stronger performance than just gender. There tends to be a big focus on gender diversity, but obviously it goes much further than that. And there's huge challenges that we've seen in 2020. That chart on the bottom right is just something I screen grabbed from Google Trends, which just shows us what people are keying into search engines, and we can see how it's just steadily grown since 2016. We saw it peak in June last year, which was just after the death of George Floyd. Whether it was contributed to that, I don't know, but we're starting to see a lot more talk in the world about these things, and that's now turning into meaningful action, which is obviously really exciting to see. So what have we seen? In our early sort of globalization of our product, we're seeing that the actual understanding of cultural diversity data is still quite novel. No one's really looked at it in the way that has been looked at, the way we see it, and what value it can provide. Most organizations, communities, governments have a lack of data. The data that they collect tends to be very scattered. It's not uniform. There's no consistent approach when it comes to trying to harvest or capture this sort of data. Typically, they go to an HR system. Very few workers in organizations trust the HR system. They give it what they must give it for tax reasons and other, but in terms of sharing other information, there's a lot of trust that needs to be gained in that space before they're willing to do that. And so what we see now is a shift from company values to, you know, more just sort of general value for business. And we see a lot of strong strategic intent from diversity and inclusion professionals. They come from all sorts of different backgrounds, from recruitment, from social work, from all sorts of different industries. But they're passionate about the subject matter and the work. So there's no shortage of ideas that they've got and where they want to go. The challenge that they have is strategic direction. What are the steps of trying to change the thinking, the understanding, and creating an environment in their workplace that is more socially providing that sort of equality and inclusion and social justice around the workplace. It's a huge job. There's no manual that comes with it. Everyone's trying to figure out ways to do it. But I think as we see the growth, we're going to see more kind of standards. And there's not, you know, some great things going on. There's some pretty awful things going on with some of the training that you see on social media. So it's an industry that's still finding its feet to a large degree. So what I thought we'd do now is just to task you people with something a little bit different. It was really enjoyable to hear what we thought about and understanding our names. But I'd like you to think about, if you were going to define cultural diversity, how would you do it? And whilst you're thinking about that, because we're talking about data and the role that it can play, if you think about what data is already available, if we think about censuses and other ways that organisations and governments collect data to understand their populations and the changes that are taking place, think about that and maybe about the countries that you've lived in or worked in, what sort of data is or isn't available around that. So if we can just spend a few moments just thinking about these things and discussing it in the breakout groups, we'll reconnect in a moment.
Yeah, just 1 second. There is a document. Please don't forget to click on that link. Go to your, room. So there's room 1, room 2, room 3, and you can write the answers there with your group to the discussion. So,
thanks, Maximo.
See you in a minute. Hello, everyone. Glad you're back. Michael, I know you're going to continue, but I just wanted to make let's maybe share a little bit from the breakouts, right? I know that in our group, we were beginning to have a great conversation. I know this was probably not enough time, but it is what it is. We want to cover a lot of ground, but maybe this is a good moment to share some of those insights. I know that in our group, for example, now Shivanjali was sharing about India, right? And how actually there, the government does have data, about caste and, because in India, they've got this amazing cultural diversity, but this data is not released for political reasons. So, I mean, I'd love to get more into the conversation of, what could India do with this data to be more inclusive, right? To bridge gaps, to find, or why does it, these are the sort of questions I think in the next breakout, we're going to try to get more in depth into that, right? Which countries, what would you do with this data once you have it? And so I don't know, does anyone want to share some insights from their groups? It'd be great to hear from some people.
I think Alma had some really good points on cultural diversity, because I think I and some of the others in the group kind of felt like, why cultural? It's politically correct. Why not just diversity? But then is she there? Yeah, Alma had some really interesting reflections, which also showed just how contextual it is. Yeah, where the caste systems in India and in Ghana, where you have different tribes. Yeah. Where the cultural diversity is important, but it also just shows that definitions, vocabulary is so important, but it's so hard to get one good universal decision on how to describe something.
Oh, wow. I'm sure Michael is going to talk more about that, but building a global standard for our survey that works all across the world with the same terminology and the same sort of database, it's a huge challenge. So I mean, I totally feel you on that. I mean, so absolutely.
Yeah, Max, I might share some of the points that came out of our group. So yeah, it was really interesting. We talked about, I think the whys the data being collected, and I think that was really about a trust. The UK apparently did a study on systemic racism, and the findings were that there isn't any, which I think is pretty hard to believe. So it's I suppose talking about sample sizes and who's responding and how that data is actually going to be used, which I think is a really important point. It was then a conversation around the challenges of it. You're putting people in boxes, yet we're trying to create inclusion. So does putting people in boxes create inclusion or not? And thinking about all the data that's captured on us already. If you think about it, my background in marketing technology, I mean, if you look at a company like Amazon, they probably know what you're going to buy next even before you know. They collect so much data, the social media platforms, the search engines. So, how can we use this data to look at spending patterns and projects that we're interested in and different cultures in different groups and how they're trending across different places and times. And then who's benefiting from better life quality and who isn't. So I think above all, it sort of came down to what's the purpose of collecting the data? What's the objectives? And perhaps the objective is to understand each other.
I just want to say something quickly. In the Nordics, it's actually against the law to do the data based on the Holocaust because of how they pointed out the Jews and sent them to Auschwitz. So that it's a very tricky subject. They don't talk about race. It's almost like this, the shoulders are scrunched up. So data is extreme challenge in the Nordic countries, or I should mainly speak for Norway.
And we may also share, right, Michael and Quincy, we were working with countries like Singapore, right, where it's forbidden to ask, is it about sexual orientation? So anyway, there's all sorts of restrictions from around the world. So I mean, would love to hear also from other people, what is the restriction in your countries, if there is any, right?
Can I'll just put on my video. I just put it in the chat just to build on what Michael, I believe, just said. In the Netherlands, we're facing a similar thing where our whole cabinet just fell because there is data on dual nationality, and people with a dual nationality have been blacklisted as fraudsters, and their rights to have child support was taken away from them. And this is still being investigated now, where people were put in huge debts just simply because, I mean, one of the key categories was identity. So your background became such a big issue. People lost everything that they built, and they've been paying taxes in this country. So it's such an important and such an incredibly sensitive issue that over and over again, historically, there's evidence of how this type of data has been used, indeed, with the Nazis in Europe, but also with the genocide in Rwanda. One of the reasons why it was so easy to kill so many Tutsis in such a short time was because the Belgian colonial powers had taught them to register ethnic group, which wasn't even a real ethnic category there, right? The Hutus and the Tutsis and the Twats. And then they killed people. So it's a very sensitive topic.
Yeah, I would like to add something to that. My husband is from Suriname in South America and lives in the Netherlands, and he just will not answer any question on any survey about anything to do with his race, his ethnicity, anything. He just won't be put into a box. And he obviously comes from a history of racism and oppression, and that's even affected his name, going back to our first exercise, where the Dutch tried to change their surname. So I really, support what you said, Alma, there. that data is only useful if it's used for useful purposes.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Sorry, someone else had something to add?
I was just going to agree with what everyone was saying, and also like being a British citizen and reading that report was literally like a punch in the gut. I could not believe it. I really couldn't. But I do think you're so right. Like there's this such a key need to think about what's the data being used for, and in this case, political means. But what you were saying, like the sample sizes and the definitions that are being used and the way that people are being categorized, it's choosing to categorize or define people's identity based on certain criteria, which people themselves wouldn't necessarily group together. And I remember like when I was teaching in the UK, they would group children and be like, oh, of African descent are in this group, and therefore they are being measured as a group for this because we're trying to be inclusive. But it was like the categorization made it even less inclusive. But then if it wasn't measured at all, it was also even less inclusive. So it feels like you're stuck because it's hard. You don't want to put people into categories of definition, and you also don't want to not identify differences, cultural or otherwise. And that is, I mean, it's such a difficult one, but it is even more upsetting when people use that to the advantage of proving that there is no problem. And if that made any sense, I don't know.
I'd like to say something. For me, that makes perfect sense. I think that what happens is, like everything, you start with, there's a difference between intention and impact. So you start with good intentions. You know, America, which is very fact-based and driven, collects a ton of data, has every 10-year census. And the questions on the American census, where I grew up, compared to the French census where I live, are different. The focus is different, but without the information, it's believed it was intended to be used to decide where do we need to focus attention? Where do we need to focus money? The intentions were good, but then we can look, as has been mentioned, at how some of that data was used in World War II, weaponized and used for very bad ends and with different impact. So it's a wicked problem. I mean, there's pretty much, you know, I don't know if anybody has an answer to how to use data responsibly, systematically around the world. With that, I need to leave you. Thank you, everybody. This has been great. Bye.
Thanks, Fabio. Well, we might move on now if we can, and appreciate everyone's comments there. So what we're going to look at now is how we've set about this challenge. And what we've discussed a lot is the intent and the purpose of it. So if we can talk about a setting that is safe and the intention is there, and so typically so far we've focused that on organizations who are investing and wanting to create more inclusive and diverse workplaces. So there's already a very strong strategic intent and a little bit of direction. Then it's a question of, well, what's the information that's going to help them? Not necessarily to put specific people in boxes, just to get an aggregated view of who they are. And this all stems around from the foundation of this tool, thinking about the problem, which is if we understand each other better, then we can start to create a more harmonious environment in whatever setting. Back through to, you know, our organization helping teach children the value of multiculturalism and giving them intercultural education. So understanding those types of things at a young age can carry through into adulthood. So they're more respective, appreciative, and see the value of diversity as opposed to see it as a potential threat. So the challenge we had was that there is no definition. Even though we teamed up with universities and we did hundreds of literature reviews, there were bits and pieces, but no one had looked at this uniformly. So what we came up with is what we call the 4 pillars. And looking at the exercise we did earlier around our names, it was interesting to see connections to all of these pillars. So some names come through some sort of faith or religion. some through the places that people were born, right down to next to a lake or a wood. Language obviously played a big part, and so did our cultural heritage, our ethnicity. What we can then do is look at the demographic and personal attributes across this. So age, gender, sexuality, education level of people, maybe the position that they have in an organization. And then we can add on top of that any other data around a sense of engagement or belonging or people's experiences, essentially. So that's the model that we built in this platform. So we have to host it in a secure and private way. All the data is aggregated, so it's impossible to see specific individuals' answers. So it gives an aggregated view. But what we've created is what we call the diversity index, which gives us an index of 0 to 100 of how diverse a certain piece is. So if we look in this example on the screen, we can see that the country's diversity index is 28 and the language index is 39. So that would suggest that there's more diversity in language than there is in countries, and there's far more diversity in worldview or religion than there are in any others. And we also give an overall index. And in the right setting, what that does is gives an organization a benchmark at a set in time of how diverse they are. So if they're trying to create more diverse environments to create more social justice, then they can see if that index is growing or declining. So it's not a score. It doesn't necessarily mean that the bigger the index, the better. It's just saying what it is right now. And what we also had to find was the data that sits behind it. So those of you that have done the survey, when you look at, looking for a language or a cultural heritage or a country or a worldview or religion, we've had to source and curate data sets that are the most inclusive that they can be, because what we discovered is that the most popular databases will only focus on the top 80 or 90% of the most popular languages or ethnicities or cultural heritages. It's like, the way I look at it, it's like renovating a house or painting a room. That first 90% is actually quite straightforward, but it's the finishing touches, that last bit that creates the quality that's the hardest. And that took many years for us to curate these data sets. And what we also discovered is that there's no single organization that's responsible for maintaining these data sets. We expect to see the number of languages decline over the coming decades, yet we're starting to see an increase in different types of religion. So what languages are disappearing? What new religions are being formed? No one's collecting this data in a global, consistent manner. If your language is missing in a database, there's no minister of languages globally that you can say, hey, this language is spelt incorrectly or is missing in a database. So we're suddenly finding ourselves the custodians of this data that's been built by academics who have spent pretty much their working lives of decades of research and understanding. And we're able now to start to scale this and digitize this work in the hope that we can contribute to it as citizens to make sure that we're starting to understand the shifts in all these different cultural dimensions when it's used for a purpose of creating harmony. So that's how we've set about defining it. The other thing that we've looked at is what we call mutuality, which is how representative is a workforce, for example, to the community it serves or its customers. Because there's a lot of research that shows us that when there's greater mutuality, for example, in the health sector, where people coming to a hospital are being cared for by people who are more representative of the community, there are far better health outcomes. People spend less time in hospital. They get over their illnesses faster. From an economic point of view, it saves money. It's a win-win all around when that representation exists. So we're working on an index to help organizations understand how close or how far away they are from the communities that matter to them, and help promote this greater alignment between setting A and setting B. So with that, I might hand over to my colleague Quincy, who's going to show us what this all looks like in this platform and how we've created these definitions and how we can actually start to use this data. So Quincy, hopefully you've got the con there. Yes?
Yep, sure. Can we see the screen there?
Yes.
And you can all hear me? Okay, I'm going to race through it here. So we're running out of time, but some of you have already done the survey, and we thank those who have participated. At the moment, our survey is in those languages, and there's Portuguese coming very soon. I'll just stick with anonymous. However, for anybody who did fill out the survey, if you did fill out your name, the only thing that we or the administrator will see is the fact that you filled in a survey. There is no access to any of the answers. On this first page, Michael touched on the 4 pillars. These aren't actually the pillars. This is just gathering some basic demographics. In gender sex, up until a few weeks ago, it just said gender, but we were approached by a group representing the intersex. And after all, intersex is the I in LGBTI, and we needed to add that in. So at the moment, we've got gender/sex. One day, I think we will split it into sex at birth and gender. Interestingly on this, we talk about sensitive data collection. We had 2 complaints from previous users in the last couple of weeks. One was that we didn't have nearly enough options here. And another complaint came in that we had far too many options, which is just the nature of what we do. But we do have here for any organisation the option to tick not listed and prefer not to say. Disability for the moment, it's umbrella terms, but we've also got prefer not to answer. And you can pick up to 3 here. Position level is pretty basic. I'll just stick here. General staff worker is full-time. We are working on a method whereby this can go into schools, perhaps where it'll just be student, teacher, staff, or in a conference setting, you're a conference delegate, presenter, admin, and then education. So we move on to the country of birth. Up until a few weeks ago, we did not have Taiwan. We do have Taiwan now. It's not just the UN countries, it's UN countries and dependent territories, and those that have been acknowledged that are self-governed and noted by more than 1 member state. No matter what country you pick here, we'll have all your states and regions from here. But we think country of birth is just one part of your story, and sometimes it's not even the most important part of your country story. I have a nephew that was born in Malaysia. He lived there until the age of 3 months old. He's in his 30s now, never been back, has no connection to Malaysia. So we asked down here, what other countries have you lived in? I've myself lived in Greece for a couple of years, and maybe I've been in the United Kingdom. So we aggregate this because quite often that's part of the story. We ask also about your grandparents and your parents, and also your citizenship, which has got all those countries in there. So that's the first of the 4 pillars. It's not just country of birth, it's your country travels, ancestry and your lived experience. Now, this one is the one that causes the most amount of consternation. Once upon a time, it did say ethnicity. And we came up with a bit of a problem in France when we tried to deploy it, that we're not allowed to ask ethnicity. And besides which, it wasn't sort of the question we were asking, because we had some American users, for instance, who just wanted to be able to type in American, and it wasn't there. It is now. American is an ancestral heritage, it is a cultural heritage, but it's not an ethnicity. I'm the same with Australian. But more to the point, we've got 9,000 options here, and it's always growing. Just in Australia, our country, we've got more than 300 First Australian Aboriginal nations in here. Most of the data they collect in Australia just says, are you Aboriginal Australian or not? Yes or no, they're the 2 options. Here we've got all the 300 nations. And in fact, the area that I live in Australia, the original custodians were known as the Kolakjan, and we've got them in here. And sadly, there's only one Kolakjan left. It's a guy in his late 60s. He has no children. And sadly, he's the last of that nation. However, it does give us great pride that we've got his nation in this database of up to 9,000 and always growing. And it was the same. We did have some feedback the other day. Oh, you didn't have Native American in there. And it was a similar thing. We do now, but we also have all the tribes of the Native American. In fact, we've got over 800 across the Americas, all listed in there. And you can pick more than one. So you might be Navajo. You also want to be able to be just be able to select Native American. I'll just pick there. Now, over here, what other cultures have had an impact on you? It's exactly the same database, but maybe you've married into a culture, or you've immersed yourself into a culture, or you've studied a culture and it has a great impact on you. There's your chance to answer that. Sexual orientation, we had pansexual and asexual added just in the last few weeks, but again, we've got not listed and prefer not to say. Appearance, we don't use the term race. We think race is a construct, but we do think appearance, you know, and this is putting it bluntly, the colors of the skin, what you see in the mirror is important. You know, we see in Australia, again, in our country, and when they line up all the politicians, it's just a bunch of white faces. But we do like to, you know, include this in here, but there's also the option, prefer not to answer, unknown, mixed heritage, and so on. And again, you can pick more than one there. I'm racing ahead here. Languages, that's pretty easy. We all speak English, I think, here today, but we've got 136 different types of English in there. And we have in excess of 8,000 languages in total. And you can pick up to 8 at an advanced level, and then 4 intermediate, 4 basic. And again, with the religion worldview, maybe you're an atheist, you get to express that, but maybe you grew up in a Catholic family and you go to church on Christmas and Easter. And we've got almost every subgroup and denomination of Catholic in there. Likewise, you know, in Islam. So if you're a Sunni Muslim, we've got all the subgroups of Sunni Islam in there. But we've also got some secular views. For instance, we do have Pastafarianism is in there. We even have the Church of Satan as a worldview. That's there. And we are going to add it, Nick, our conveners, now, because it is May the 4th today, International Star Wars Day. And there was a request to add in Jedi. We haven't got it yet, but we're thinking of doing it. And we did get approached by a couple of people saying, listen, we had one user say, I'm a communist. I see the world through my communist lens. Why don't you put that in? Our answer to that is, this is about cultural diversity, not political diversity. And I don't think a day will come where we're going to start putting in political leanings into our worldview religions. And our communist contributor ended up picking, I don't have a worldview religion. Now, I won't hit submit here, but let's just have a quick look in this last couple of minutes at our group from the Catalyst. I could spend an hour taking you through all the dashboard here, but we had 30 people put in a survey. So thank you so much for participating in that. And across those 30 people, there's 41 countries in where they were born or their ancestry. Here's a little heap back from where you were all born. And if we look down here, as an overview, this diversity index, which is what Michael touched upon, is a measurement. There's no good place for it to be. We know that 0 is probably too low. That means there is absolutely no diversity. Where 50 people who all speak just the one language, 100 might be too diverse, find it very difficult to communicate, because it would be 50 people of different ages and languages and religions and so on. So we know that it's going to be somewhere between 20 and 80, depending on the organization, what sort of industry you're in, what country you're in. But more importantly, the measurement is something that you track over time. Our dashboard here, I'm trying not to do a big cell here, but it just gives you a whole lot of little facts. It also isolates individual sections of our 4 pillars, which is providing the measurement. So just on countries of birth, we've got a measurement of 57 in our diversity, nobody born in Switzerland. And it also has the ability to kick out a whole lot of key facts down here. So even just down here, 33% of our group here today at Catalyst have at least one grandparent who was born in a different country than themselves. And if we look at languages, what have we got here? 13 people speak languages, 13 different languages at an advanced level. Of the 30 participants, 90% of you are multilingual, and it looks like the men on average speak 4.3 languages per contributor to some level. So look, that's just a lightning quick look at the dashboard. And at this point, cognizant of time, I'll throw back to Michael or Reza. I'm not too sure who's going to take over from here, but I'll stop sharing. And hand it back to the team. And take a breath.
Right. Thanks, Quincy. That was a whistle-stop tour. I appreciate that. So it's really fascinating to see this data. And as we talked about the sensitivities about it before, obviously works in a setting where there's a really positive intent, and that's kind of what we're focused on. So the administrators obviously agree to privacy terms in their own code of conduct. But generally speaking, what we've seen is, as well as I mentioned before, a strong strategic intent to make a place that's more just and equitable. And the organisations we're working with haven't been able to really understand who they are. And you know, once they get a picture of that, simple little things like recently sending an email about Ramadan and getting amazing feedback from people saying, wow, okay, that's great, you know, just highlighting what it is and what it celebrates and what it can mean to the workplace setting. You know, we've heard stories of people having to change their name when they apply for a job, having to essentially not being able to bring their whole selves to work. And so what we're trying to do here is give a broader understanding of who we are, to embrace the diversity, because we know it's not only the right thing to do socially from a justice perspective, but it's good for business. And in those settings, it's, you know, we can see how this data can really sort of help create those kind of environments. We're running out of time, so I just want to quickly move on. One of the things that we plan to do was a session on this, which we're not going to have time to, but just to sort of highlight the journey that people go through when they're applying for a job, working for a company, or even wanting to become members of Catalyst 2030. Essentially, it's, you know, what makes someone aware of a particular place? Why would they choose to be part of that? How do organisations attract people? So it's thinking differently about creating a more diverse work environment. And if you look at a gender perspective, say from a mining company, often they're only going to really attract people like them if they keep doing the same things that they've done to date. So it's thinking about doing things differently and going that extra step to think about how they can engage with more diverse groups to attract a more diverse level of people coming into the organisation. Once they're in the organisation, then how do you engage them? How can you help them bring their whole selves to work so they can, you know, feel more comfortable in that setting and bring more of their diverse thinking, you know, to the environment, to the teams that they're working in? How do you retain them? How do you promote them? How do you create more equitable promotions in your organisation? So the further north you go, what we tend to see is less diversity. How can we make sure that diversity is spread all the way through the organisation? There isn't just this kind of cladding that takes place at the top level of an organisation to create an impression of diversity when we know it doesn't exist the further down or the nearer the top, whichever way it is across that organisation. So it's thinking about how data can play a really positive aspect to each stage of that journey, so people can feel that they can join an organisation and bring their whole selves to that, because the organisation's got a better understanding of what these different cultures offer and how to respect them and how to include them in the way that they go about business. So with that, we're not going to do this breakout. I'm hoping that we have Peter Mousaferiadis here today, joining from his car outside of his meeting. I'm going to keep talking for a moment until I hear his voice. But Peter's just going to join us hopefully in a second to explain the role of data as how he sees it and what sort of led him to creating this tool within Cultural Infusion. Peter, are you there?
I certainly am, Michael. It's so great to see you from my car here, and you might hear some motorbikes, you know, riding past me, which are a little bit noisy. So I do apologize. And hi everyone, hi from what I could describe as probably the longest cyclic culture in the world. The First Nations people here have been continuing their way of life for more than 60,000 years. And I pay my respect to not only their past and present, but also the emerging leaders of the region that I represent today, but also anyone who might be in the audience who might come from a First Nations background. I pay my respect to you. Michael, just feeding off what you're saying earlier on, you're right. The answer does lie in better data. The true extent of the opportunity and participation gap is never going to really be properly understood, because we don't have consistent, reliable data on inclusion, on representation, and more importantly, who makes up our community, who makes up our organizations. It's not readily available. So better data on not only cultural diversity, but on the many different dimensions and demographic dimensions of diversity is really the first step that needs to be taken, and that's going to really begin to feed into our policies and programs that can be targeted to making our societies, our organizations more inclusive, more representative, and more equitable. But just a few words about my background. I understand that you did the exercise today, what's in a name, and every name has a story behind it. It's connected to a place, it's connected to a space, it's connected to a culture. And my surname, Mousaferiadis, and a lot of people have difficulty with it, but I think it's quite easy because I've been pronouncing it for the last 52 years. It means the traveler in more than 800 languages. And Mousafir literally means, it comes from the word Musa, which was the word for Moses, which literally means boxwood, and that's because they found Moses in a wooden box. So in a whole lot of Central Asian languages, Balkan languages, North African languages, Central Asian languages, all the way to the Great Wall of China, it means the traveler. So I'm going to read through the notes and I'm going to be interested to hear what the story behind each of your names are. So I've had many different careers. I've worked as a conductor, composer, creative director. About 20 years ago, I was sort of thrusted into this stage where I was beginning to direct major intercultural productions for the Parliament of World Religions, the United Nations. So I was finding myself working with many people from many different backgrounds. And so I moved into education, where I started to create programs that could really start to build intercultural understanding as a core value and key competency of what it means to be a global citizen. But during this whole journey, I started to realize the enormity of cultural diversity, humanity's greatest asset, our most underutilized resource, and that we actually don't do enough to really draw on diversity, in particular cultural diversity, as a way of building socially cohesive communities, reducing poverty, sustainable development, really developing quality education programs, but more importantly, how cultural diversity can be a driver for innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. And most of us here today are social entrepreneurs. I coined the phrase back in the 90s, hybrid social enterprise, and I literally formed this bi-structure where I had a not-for-profit entity, a mission-driven organization, working in tandem with a profit-based organization, and that allowed me to really be able to begin to access resources so I can really do good in the community. So social entrepreneurs, what do? We try to use market forces to create a positive impact on society. But a few years ago, I started to refer to the work that I did and to myself as a cultural entrepreneur. And I think cultural entrepreneurship for me is really about how do we use market forces to motivate behavioral change. So, just some sort of bigger statements that I wanted to make. We're living in a really important moment in history. Why? Well, there's really not been any other time like it. And I know people say this all the time, and that's just, oh, here you go. You're saying that, you're using a phrase where people use again and again, but it is different. Why? Because back in 1989, Tim Berners-Lee came along and developed the World Wide Web. And in a short period of time, it developed this massive, economic globalization without globalization of values and ethics. And one of the things that's happened in the last 30 years is peace has been on the decline. And there's been a lot of data that's come out around this. And a lot of the conflict that we're experiencing in the world today has a cultural dimension. I'm not saying this, the United Nations is saying this, UNESCO is saying this, that 75% of all the conflict that we have in the world today has a cultural dimension. And in terms of dollars, that equates to a bit over $10 trillion. 10,000 million or 10,000 billion. I mean, I can't even work out how big that number is. I mean, it's such a colossal number. So what are we doing, as a society to be able to really, counter, a lot of, the conflict that we're having in the world. And a lot of that, we're experiencing a lot of, fear in the community, a lot of ignorance, which are the drivers of racism. So the counter drivers become familiarization, become collaboration. So Diversity Atlas for us, about 6 years ago, my CTO came to me, Reza Moyini, and he said, you always talk about cultural diversity. I'm a metrics man. We need to be able to measure this notion. And what we realized after conducting about 300 literature reviews was that cultural diversity was poorly defined, it was analytically neglected, and it was in need of robust understanding. And it was at that point that we began to disaggregate it, and I believe Michael's probably spoken about that today, into these numerous pillars. But start to think about the Sustainable Development Goals. For me, there's a touch point at every single goal, because every single organization can do work to make themselves more representative, more inclusive, more equitable, but it needs to take a data-driven approach. I think my time's up because I've been told I've only got 5 minutes and I don't have 5 hours, which I usually like to have. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to all of you for questions. And I want to thank my colleagues today, Quincy Hall, Maximo Seco, who's based in Spain, in Galicia, and our Chief Experience Officer, Michael Walmsley. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you. I want you to, go away today think about the session that you've been part of today and what that might mean for your work and how it might be able to bring value, not only to your organizations, but really beginning to understand the importance of diversity, the importance of cultural diversity. Just think for a moment. There are 8,500 ethnicities out there. There are thousands of languages out there. There are thousands of religions. And we know that someone's ethno-linguistic background shapes cognitive processes, shapes sympathetic responses, shapes behavioral responses. We all see the world through our own lens. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I mean, if we wanted to be fair to participants, we should close in 2 minutes. I'd love to hear from some people because I have more time, but just, because some people have been writing messages like, would you share the recording? Like, what's the follow-up? Just to say, we would love to follow up with you, to stay in touch, to build a community of practice in which to talk about, cultural diversity, measuring diversity for social cohesion. So Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, we should have, we'd love if you could write your email to us in the chat, we'll follow up. In any case, I think we should have from the registration, we should have some email addresses. We will share the recording, we will share the slides. We look forward really to collaborate with you, see if your organization, whether it's hybrid, non-profit, for-profit, it doesn't matter, whether you want to engage in this sort of work, looking at diversity in your workplace to bridge gaps, to build inclusion and social cohesion. So having said that, because that's an important closing before some of you run now at the turn of the hour, that this is it's not that, if you do diversity, if you read diversity stuff, trainings should not be a one-time thing, right? This should be an ongoing work. Exactly. So we should stay engaged. We should keep talking about it. As Peter was saying, I'd love to hear, because we've been grabbing the mic, our team, for the last half an hour, and we couldn't do the last breakout. So I mean, I'd love to open the floor also to anyone to hear some reflections, and we really look forward to working with you in the future.
Yeah, huge thanks from the Catalyst community to this kind offering for the survey and for this session. And yeah, lots of opportunities to continue this journey together in our Catalyst community and with the expertise of the team that have been speaking. But yeah, it's all about you, it's all about us. So let's do this together. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers.